I'm thanking him. Welcome. We are really pleased and honored that all of you are able to join us today for this very special event within our college. The speaker today, Stanley Tigerman, is part of our guest lecture series, and I'm the coordinator of that. So this is a special Saturday event, and it's really great that we have a lot of students that have come out for this, as well as professional practitioners and local area people. So first of all, thanks everyone for being here. Additionally, I'd like to remind you of the series. The spring series has 2 more lectures left in it. On Wednesday at 4 p.m. will be Bradley Lynch, and that is a young practicing architect from Chicago. And then April 19th, a Monday at 8 p.m., I hope to have a large audience back here again for the final lecture of the spring lecture series by Bernardo Fortbreggio of Arquitectonica. So again, it's been an excellent spring lecture series, and I'm really pleased that we could dovetail this event with the CAP Alumni Day today. What I'd like to do also is recognize first our student hosts for the reception that will follow this event, and that's Kyle Wood and Bethany. Are they in the audience? Thank you very much. This has been a tradition this semester. We've been having tremendous luck with students putting together a reception immediately following the lecture, which will give everyone a chance to informally talk about the content and questions, and it's a really quite nice time after immediately following the lecture. Additionally, faculty hosts is the other tradition that we've established this semester. And at this point in time, I'd like to introduce Associate Professor Michel Mounayar, who is the acting Associate Dean of our college, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Pam. Welcome, everybody. It is my distinct privilege to present to you our speaker today, Mr. Stanley Tigerman. Mr. Tigerman is a principal in the firm of Tigerman McCrory and a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Stanley Tigerman received his architectural degree from Yale University in 1960 and 61. He has worked for George Keck, Scott Owens and Michel, Paul Rudolph. He has been a visiting professor at numerous universities, including Yale, Harvard, and was the resident architect at the American Academy in Rome. Recently, he co-founded Archwork, the Chicago Design School devoted for socially conscious design. He has written extensively for architectural journals and is the author of several books, including Versus, an American Architect's Alternative, published by Rizzoli in 1982, The Architect of Exile, published again by Rizzoli in 1988, and working on several publications as we speak. He is the recipient of many design awards from the American Institute of Architects, as well as from Progressive Architecture and Architecture Record. He has received several honors, awards from the National AIA, as well as numerous distinguished building awards and the Distinguished Service Awards from the Chicago chapter. His work has been exhibited in numerous exhibitions, including the Venice Biennale in 1976 and 1980, and the Chicago Architectural Exhibition at the Museo del Castelvecchio in Verona in 1988. In the afterword of the book entitled Stanley Tigerman, Building and Projects 1966 until 1989, published by Rizzoli, Professor Hedek wrote, I first met Stanley Tigerman in the fall of 1963. We were visiting critics at Cornell School of Architecture. I was in one studio and Stanley in another. A student from his studio kept running into our room nervous, worried, and agitated. He makes us do drawings, the student says, over and over until they are perfect. We can't even erase anything. He simply tells us to get it right. But Professor Professor then explains, when I heard these remarks, having not met the teacher next door, I already respected him. He was a man after my own heart. Please open your hearts and join me in welcoming a visionary, a world-class architect, and a great teacher, Mr. Stanley Tigerman.
Thanks, Michel. Can you hear me? I don't talk very loud. Can you all hear me up there? Terrific. Thanks. Thanks, Michel. I really appreciate it. Well, it's nice to be back. I haven't been here in a very long time, and it's great to see a lot of faces like Sonny and Carol Tiernan, who are maybe not here right now. And notably not to see one Marv Rosenman, who was the one that persuaded me to come down. I was very interested in hearing the new chairman of architecture's remarks about his 7-point initiative, all of which I have to tell you I'm completely in support of, the breaking down barriers and so forth. Nonetheless, I was shocked to not hear the word design at all in the 7 points. And I thought, gee, maybe with the advent of the computer and interactive stuff, maybe design is out. It might be, actually. I was a little stunned. In any case, it's great to be back, and the reason it's great to be back, I really couldn't figure out until I talked to this young man. Raise your hand. And I asked him, who's a student here, and I asked him what he thought of the place. And he said very proactively, it's the best design school in the country. And I thought, wow, either the kid is ignorant or he's incredibly loyal, or he's onto something, because actually I remember it as a very good design school. In actual fact, I had a wonderful time when I was a visiting critic here, although there's a guy in the audience that said when I taught in '78, don't you remember me? And I said, absolutely not. So I may not remember the individual people, but I remember the experience as a general wonderful experience. And I think that Sonny will even support that. This was a wonderful experience for me. So in that sense, it's great to be back. I am going to do this as quickly as I can. I've selected, the lecture is lecture. The talk is broken into 2 parts. I have nothing to lecture about. One is selected projects of mine that deal with the subject, and I'll tell you why the subject in a second, meaning morality and ethics, a case for morality and ethics in design theory and practice. And then the second portion is about ArchiWorks, which is what an exemplar of that is a school that an interior designer named Eva Maddox in Chicago and I founded. Well, this is the end of our 5th year, actually, coming up in May. The reason for the title is for the whole time that I've been practicing, which is, I guess, 37 years now, it seems staggering to me, shocking. I've also been writing, and I've also been teaching the whole time. So my practice has remained generally pretty small. I mean, in the context of big city stuff, there are 15 of us. And the only reason it's that big is my wife, Margaret McCurry, it's Tigerman McCurry, takes up about 6 of them, and I take up about 6. And then it's the 2 of us and clerical people. I can't do any more, and I never could. And we've never had a practice, except for one brief, horrible moment in the late 80s when it grew to over 20, which is a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake because I hate the notion of laying people off. I hate the notion of hiring them, and I, worse, hate the notion of firing them. So I try to not hire anybody and let the normal attrition of opening one's own practice or whatever take over, and then we replace a person. So we've always had a small practice. In any case, I've written the whole time. The reason that we have a small practice is I'm not, and this is not made to make me sound good. I'm not interested, I'm not, what is the word? I'm not interested in having a huge amount of work. I've basically don't have a lot of ambition. And so a small practice is fabulous because you can just focus on a few things. Margaret has way more work than I do now, thank God, and makes way more money, and is killing herself, which I'm trying to stop, but she's ambitious. You know, Helmut Jahn, Margaret McCurry, and Bob Stern are like peas in a pod. They really want it all, and I don't want it all. I'm thrilled. When the unbearable lightness of being theory, I love, when an employee comes to me and wants to leave, and I always know, what this, when somebody's going to come, that they're going to leave you, and they come, with their head down, I know exactly what they're going to say, and I can't resist smiling because the overhead goes down. I mean, or a client is going to fire you because you're not listening, or something like that. I also smile. I love getting fired. I love quitting. I've been fired so many times and have quit so many times. I like a small operation, largely because I do stuff like this. I write books. So the name of the lecture is the name of the next book, and this is a précis for it, which is called The Case for Morality and Ethics. I'm not going to read it to you, don't worry. In architectural, in design theory and practice. And it has a postscript of a case study of ArchiWorks, which is actually not being written by me, but by this year's class of ArchiWorks interns. I'm not writing it. But I am teaching the theory course this year at ArchiWorks. So I'm involved, but they're writing it is the key. By morality and ethics, I don't mean professional morality or ethics in the context of what AIA or whatever. That is up to each of us to determine in the practical realm. I'm talking about a deeper issue of morality and ethics, because for me, if there is no case for morality and ethics, architecture, frankly, is a bore, an utter bore, even the art of architecture. If you don't have that deep resonating spirit that is truly, absolutely what Kierkegaard referred to, that isn't talked about, but that makes you an ethical human being, then you frankly have no business practicing architecture. So you can tell right off the bat that I'm anti-marketing very, very deeply. And all of the things that draws work to firms. I feel that that has no business in architecture at all. This is supposed to be an ennobling act. It is supposed to be a discipline, not an art and not a profession. It's more related to a monastic pursuit. That's my view in any case. So I'm going to show you a few slides that digresses about this subject through the vehicle of our work, but it is not to suggest that everything that I've done has been correct in this area. Absolutely not. Most of the things actually in my life and in my career come out of getting it wrong. And it's always been a case of trying to correct the trajectory of my life and my career. There's no question about it. So with that, if you could kindly turn off the lights, Pam or whoever, and then I'll get started. I'm going to go back to a large part of our work. I don't want to say an overwhelming part, but a large part of our work has always been in areas that I never quite understood would become the areas that help, from my point of view, come together with Eva Maddox to begin ArchiWorks. It began very early. This is a project that I was only in, I started my practice in '62 when I came back from New Haven. And fairly early on, by the middle '60s, we'd begun this project, which is near Hyde Park. It's in Woodlawn in Chicago, and it was the largest low-rise 221d3 project at the time. I'm not showing it because of any great design concept, but because of certain things that transpired at that time. You may know, those of you that know Chicago will know that the public housing projects are on their way down. They're being demolished, which is a staggering collective national embarrassment, that buildings that were done with great optimism and verve in the 40s and 50s, at the end of the 40s after World War II, in the 50s, public housing based on Corbu's Ville Radieuse and all that have utterly and totally failed because of a lack of behavioral research and being open to things that are today de rigueur. So one of the things when I came back from graduate school and I became registered and was, like many young architects of the moment, involved in the AIA locally, and I became the chairman of its planning committee. And these housing projects had come up like anything. This is '62. So most of the public housing had been built in Chicago, all high-rises, all in two separate strips. One, the Robert Taylor Homes project, paralleling the Dan Ryan Expressway, and the other one, Cabrini Green. And we're producing about a density in these tall buildings of about 45 units to the acre. And I made a big fuss saying that you could do low-rise housing at about 45 units to the acre. The product of it was I got to do this project, which was called Woodlawn Gardens, which is about 47, or I don't remember anymore, 47 or 48 units to the acre. And they're all in what we called at the time 2+1s. That is to say, a duplex over a flat. And you gained access to the duplex through these outside stairs. And so this was a two-story, townhouse, in any case, a unit. And in the ground floor, in other words, there were two of these, if you will, over one flat, so that the areas were basically the same. This obviously a little less, the stair took some room, and so forth. But it was a very interesting proposition at the time. It was an exercise not in my proactive morality, certainly, but because of Woodlawn Gardens, which is where Jesse Jackson began his career, with a man named Reverend Arthur Brazier, who headed TWO at the time. And their contention was that they wanted simultaneously a very high density, but they were using a suburban, then, Caucasian housing model of 2 or 3 story attached units. But they wanted the density because they understood the political reality of having a voice in city council. So it was their morality, not mine. But I understood it, no question. At the very same time, and as a product of a guy who became my closest friend, and who just this year is becoming an honorary FAIA at the convention. His name is Mazharul Islam, Bengali architect, was the father of architecture in what at that time was East Pakistan. And like some of you today, and maybe those of the alums that are here, you get actually, because of the hours it takes in study to be an architect, you get very close to your class friends, your classmates. Very. Sometimes kids marry, whatever it is. This guy and I became very, very dear friends, and we really promised that we would find a way to work together. Sure enough, 2 years later, I made my first trip with Paul Rudolph, who was then the chairman, still just resigned actually, of the school in New Haven. And we went to CMUS. This is what is now Bangladesh, what was then East Pakistan. And Islam had structured a situation whereby Louis Kahn got the project of the capital, now the capital, what was then the second capital of Pakistan. Rudolph did a project adding on to the Agricultural University in Mymensing. And Mr. Islam and I, through the World Bank, did 5 polytechnic institutes in 5 little jungle villages throughout what is now Bangladesh. And it was interesting, not, again, I don't know really how to explain this. When I talk about morality and ethics, certain things happened to me that I had nothing to do with, which was but made myself accessible to, is all I can take credit for. He insisted that I eat the food and drink the water, and so I, of course, got amoebic dysentery. But from that point on, and I recovered, and from that point on, I was one of them, which was basically his point, that I didn't have to just hang out at the Intercontinental Hotel with the USAID guys, which means CIA, and so forth. So the projects were fabulous because they were about the people, basically. They were training people to be supervisors, not PhDs, supervisors in jute technology, gas, oil, and all that. But during the course of that, mind you, this is from 64 to 74. In almost the dead middle was the revolution that freed East Pakistan, and it became Bangladesh. And when you work on a project, you become very close to the people. I always have. I'm not a design architect. I started out my career as an apprentice before I ever got a degree, after I flunked out of MIT. So I was always doing working drawings and in the field and writing specs. That's my background. So I became close to these people. And then the war began, and the West Pakistanis, now Pakistan, the Punjabis and Pathanis, there was kind of a genocide, and they were trying to reduce this to an agricultural society and killing the intelligentsia, all the faculty, and so forth, which I also witnessed. So I basically resigned the projects. That's a part of a moral and ethical position. That was the first time I'd actually done something actively, proactively, that even vaguely smacked of that issue, of an ethical issue, if you will. Because I couldn't work for basically a country that was engaging in what they were doing. So I resigned the commissions. I had a press conference. The World Bank was furious. I've never gotten a government project since. I never will. I'm sure I'm on a good old-fashioned CIA list, and so forth. In any case, we did build this because when the war was over in September of 71, the Bengalis were wanting to reinstate me. The World Bank and USAID wanted nothing to do with me. But the Bengalis insisted, and so I was reinstated and completed the project. The result of which is that my friendships endured in that country. I'm going back in a month and a half because we're now engaged with my same friend on a gigantic project in Dhaka, which will take longer than the rest of my time on Earth to sort of engage in. So this was a very important project in my life. Another project, which again I had nothing to do with getting, I was an interview process, and I got the Library for the Blind and physically, what they called handicapped, not exactly a politically correct term today, for this Library for the Blind and physically disabled, which was a very important project, not because of who gave it to me, which is the Chicago Public Library, but because an initiative that I began working with the American Federation of the Blind and working with disabled persons very early on. This is done in 77. So that's 22 years ago. And it was a very important project because it began engaging in a series of focus groups, not with the client of record, who wasn't particularly happy that I was working with the American Federation for the Blind, but of the blind, but because this would be the user group. And the public library didn't have anything of that kind in Chicago at the time. But I somehow understood that working with a user group and getting post-occupancy evaluations is what it was called from the late 60s on forward, was actually crucial in understanding certain things. So this was a very important project in that development as well. At the same time, in the later, even in the beginning of the 80s, I did a competition for a museum which I knew would never be realized, for the painting the Guernica, that Picasso painted in the late 30s as a protest piece, probably the most powerful social piece that was done in the 20th century as a painting, I think. But in any case, certainly one of them. Protesting the use of the Stuka dive bomber, by the Third Reich in anticipation of the Second World War in assisting Franco in the fighting in Spain. And they bombed this town completely. I tried to find the slide that I have of the town bombed out. And there was a competition. Picasso had suggested that the painting would never go back to the Prado until Franco died. But when Franco died, and Picasso had died as well, of course it went to the Prado in Madrid, which probably where it belonged. But he had really wanted to place it in Guernica. So the Basque people, which is obviously a separatist country. I mean, think of Northern Ireland, the Basque country of Spain, and what was East Pakistan, Bangladesh. These sort of wonderfully primitive, direct places on Earth that are not as connected to the mother lode, as it were, the mother country in a certain way. So the idea was that they would engage in they would build something for the 67 sketches that Picasso had made. The dive bombers flew in this axis, and I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but what I did was an underground museum of memory with a series of platonic solids as kind of 5 easy pieces. So we got a runner-up, but in any case, it never got built. But that was another case of interpretation, of trying to interpret something that brought out, I can only say, the poignancy in the program. This is another example of it, is a Boy Scout camp for the physically disabled. It's Camp Hoover on the Fox River west of Chicago. And because I had been a Boy Scout, everybody was, I suppose, but I really wanted to make, like the Library for the Blind, a much better facility for the disabled, physically challenged inhabitants of such a place than the able-bodied kids had. I really wanted the able-bodied scouts, which is what Norman Rockwell's image that he painted, of an otherwise paramilitary organization, to feel that they had something, that they would be in envy of what the disabled kids. What was wonderful about this is the Chicago Council for the Boy Scouts developed a program which then informed this little sort of Tuscan temple, I suppose, which is only 10 by 10, which has a porch, which is barrier-free, of course, but that's not really the issue. The idea is to challenge the Scouts in lots of other ways. The Chicago Council did a wonderful thing. There are 2 double bunks in each of these, and they have a program where the able-bodied Cub Scouts are in the upper bunks and the disabled Boy Scouts, the older kids, are in the lower bunks. So it's kind of a reverse mentoring, a doubling up of mentorship. I mean, the older kid mentors anyway. So the disabled kid puts in what you lay on him, which is fabulous, is a burden of responsibility of looking after the able-bodied younger kid who's running around and so on. But the younger kid, because he's ambulatory in some series of ways, is also mentoring and helping the older disabled. So the disabled Scouts can be blind, can have Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, MS, whatever. So it's a wonderful program. For me, that was also a fabulous project. So this was the indoor pool for them. So, and on it went. We did, this is also on the Fox River, but much farther north, near Elgin, a little town called Algonquin, Illinois, where there's a camp, it's a 100-year-old camp about now, that was done initially by Halliburton Roche, not Halliburton Root, around 1898 or 7. This camp, Camp Algonquin, has always been run by United Charities and is for children who are abused by parents. And the idea is that the parents and the children go there for week-long periods. And then we were asked to do the camp center, which was a very important project. Similarly, I mean, the different ways to approach this subject matter. This is, I had done a small building in Berlin, in what was West Berlin, and then the head of the gallery, AIDA's, Kristen Feyreis in Berlin, in whatever year it was, I think in the late 80s, just after our project was being finished, had an exhibition that people like Danny Libeskind and lots of it, Hayek and I and others, all of whom had built in Berlin, were asked to think about the year 2000. And what I did was to work on the Berlin Wall. This is before it came down. And the idea was that I thought when it became unified, this is East Berlin, West Berlin, that we would just simply put where the streets, we'd leave the wall, do a canal, and do a linear park with plane trees, sycamore trees, in memory of what was the wall. little knowing that the wall would come down. So that was that project. But trying to cause them to remember. Germans, we know, have sometimes collective amnesia about certain things. So it was important to me at the time to develop this kind of piece about memory. So in other words, it's how you do a project, and that you embed some of those issues of poignancy. This is another case which is going on as we speak. You'll see that it was done in, the sketches were done in 1990, and it was in Belgrade. Who knew? They asked 8 architects, one from a series of 8 different countries, I was the American, to do on the top of the new Belgrade, overlooking the junction of the Sava and the Danube rivers, do social housing, much like we did in Fukuoka in Japan, or much like Berlin. And it was a little teeny project, as those projects were, of a very small apartment complex. Why can I not find this? Here it is. And so I was looking first at pre-industrial. Here's a country that was trying to leapfrog over the industrial age to a post-industrial age from a pre-industrial agricultural age. So I was trying to do a form that dealt with an agricultural form that then was broken apart. In the process, it became, I suppose you'd call it deconstructed, but that was really not the intention. A series of axes evolved to get the view down to the junction of these rivers. This was at the crest, just below the crest of a hill. These 8 projects were to have been built. Well, then the troubles began in Belgrade, and nothing went ahead, but they still want to go ahead with it. And so I only last Thursday received, meaning 2 days ago, received a letter from the guy who's running this, a planner architect, wanting my support in writing on behalf of the Serbs. And I had written him a letter 3 years ago, 2 years ago, asking to resign the commissions and not have my project built, because at the time the Serbs were raping all these Muslim women and so forth. And there comes a point, no matter that you think a project is terrific on your own behalf or not, that you just have to quit. So I resigned the thing. But again, this amnesia thing is fabulous. So he writes me this letter on Thursday, and it's on my computer. I'm ready to go. I mean, I'm going to write a letter that's going to blow his socks off. He just doesn't understand. There are certain things you can't do. So this was the project. I loved the project, but not for whom the client became. This was interesting, and actually brings me more to the subject of morality and ethics. A very well-known historian, Heinrich Klotz, now head of the history department at the University at Marburg in Germany. At the time, this is in 84, I guess, at the Deutsches Architecture Museum in Frankfurt, a series of niches were at the rear end of that museum, and a number of architects were asked to, I don't know, based on Adam's House in Paradise, something about man's original home and what to do. And I tried a number of, it was a little teeny space, nominally 5 by 10 feet and 9 feet high, something like that. I didn't know really what to do, and I was on a lecture tour in Germany at the time, in Austria, and I visited the site, and I picked the one with 2 very large trees, knowing that there's no way to do anything. And I didn't, it may have been done perversely, but I just blithely picked that particular niche. And of course, I went through a series of false starts, didn't know what to do, and ultimately just measured the space with the biblical cubit measurement, and then cutting it short, breaking the thing as it hit the tree. That was an important project for lots of reasons, not the least of which is the orientation toward the West Wall in Jerusalem. 10 years later, in 94, a number of architects in Chicago were asked to design a Sukkot for the Jewish holiday Sukkot. And at that time, I backed off from design entirely and said, it actually seems because there was a Catholic woman now in New York working in my office named Susan O'Brien, who was fabulous. And we decided to do it straight from the text. In other words, the tractate in the Book of Seasons describes precisely how to build, what to build, and so forth. So we try to do it straight up without adding any of those Platonic hierarchies which are a product of interest in design. So these are selected two of the selected drawings, or a selection of two of the drawings, a plan and a section, and the spacing of the wood and everything is precisely by the book. And we built a model, and we then built the piece full scale. And that was a very interesting exercise to not do it out of an architectural series of hierarchies, beginning with, frankly, Hellenic Christian faith. Not because I'm Jewish, not because Susan was Catholic, but to see what it would mean to do something straight away textually and delete or void out the potentiality of aesthetics. What I want to end with, before I show the ArchiWorks stuff, is, and I understand there are two people from Ball State that have actually applied to this or been recommended. IMI, the International Masonry Institute, do any of you know about that? They run a camp in Swans Island in Maine, just offshore from Bar Harbor, actually from Bass Harbor. I think one or two are going from Ball State, and which I'll be there, it turns out, because we're doing the camp. The camp has been run without the buildings as an ad hoc thing, and the kids, the one or two of you that are going, will find that you'll share quarters living in houses throughout the island before this thing gets built, which probably won't start till next spring, about a year from now. They're in the fundraising stage right now. The reason I show it is not because of the design, not because of the attempt at using authentic, or I should say masonry authentically, but much more to the point, your chairman's words at lunch, not mine, but that was how we began ArchiWorks, about breaking down barriers. This places architects and masons together to not let the architect have the top dog role. In other words, that the mason apprentices and the architectural students are there to design together and then to build together. Maybe not in that order. Maybe to build something first, maybe then to design something second, and then finally build the thing again third. So as to ennoble the masonry apprentices' understanding that they have a terrific history and a position in society, and to tell the architects that no man is an island, as it were, that old phrase, that this is a team operation. In any case, this is the camp that we're doing with the great hall and drafting thing and the Adirondacks where the kids will live, little Adirondacks for visiting lectures and VIPs, a chapel, etc., a growing wall, brick by brick of the kids that have been there and so forth, and where they have their clam bakes, as you'll discover, those of you going. So that's the site plan. Here's I don't want to get into the detail of this, the Great Hall. It's called Between a Rock and a Hard Place because the whole island is granite. So this is a composite of granite and masonry in various ways. And this is the drafting hall and seminar rooms and the elevation of it at one scale, and the two buildings together from downhill and from uphill. So it's stone and slate and brick terraces and so forth. The little ones, the first little Adirondack for one or two people. I mean, it's very direct, very primitive, and as small as I could make it. So that's what it looks like. All jack arches, no linteling, no steel, no nothing. And if I went back to the first one, taking the thrusts of large spans in masonry and so forth. So it's a little neo-Romanesque. That's the four. Let me go back. That's for the four campers together sort of 2 and 2, and it's sort of a small-scale metaphor of the large of the Great Hall. And that's what it looks like. And the chapel and pool and campanile and so forth, bell tower. That's the site of it. It's actually about a 70-foot drop to the water from the road. Okay, this is a project that our office is just finishing, which is a very important project in my view. It's a daycare center which includes little kids from 0 to 2, and then Head Start, 3 to 5. And it's across the street, literally from Robert Taylor Homes, the public housing. This is South State. Those high-rises are running down the Dan Ryan Expressway there. And so this is also between a grammar school and a very, very well thought of traditional high school, DuSable High School. And many of the children that are in here are the children of teenage single moms who are in school here. So these kids will go into this grammar school and their mothers are here. This is in a very tough area, but as far as I'm concerned, it could have been Lake Forest, because the idea, like the Library for the Blind, like all of these things, is to make something better here than what you'd find in Lake Forest. So this, in the spirit of Maria Montessori, has a gigantic 90 by 90 foot, 1-story high buildings around it. Courtyard, cortile, atrium, open to the sky, so that the kids can be out of doors in all kinds of weather, protected by a building from the drive-by shooters, which are ferocious, the gang lords and the drug dealers, so that they're protected both indoor and out. These are, at that time there were 3, there are now 2, gyms and so forth. So this is the actual plan of the building, that you come in here and the classrooms, depending whether it's from little kids up through Head Start and so forth, and the teachers are at these anchor points. This will be finished in 6 weeks, so it's up and one can sense it. And then these are gyms, they call them gross motor development, but they're gymnasiums. Little ones for the little kids, because the little kids are in these wings, the big kids are in these wings, so this is the bigger gym, the littler gym. And when everybody is socialized, they all play together. The little kids, to avoid bullies, can play here, out of doors. The bullies get to be in here until their social skills are somewhat better honed, and that they can then play out of doors here. This was a very important project to work on. And it wasn't based, obviously, on a bottom line concept. This is way more money because there's much more perimeter. I'm reminded of when Corbu and CIM asked Mies, when he saw Mies's drawings, which were done for them in the 30s, of those 30s courthouses. Excuse me. He said, but Mies, this isn't low-cost housing. And Mies, without emulating the German accent, said, let them give the workers more money. And that, to me, that's like Hayek building that fabulous tower in Berlin, which no rich person can afford in the United States, which is to say having a duplex for one person, in other words, 2 stories for one family, for social housing, which is fabulous. So my view is the same. This has to be a better one than what you find in Kenilworth or Winnetka or Santa Barbara or Darien, in my view. So it's being built. And it's a great cooperative. It's between the private sector, the City of Chicago, the Board of Education, excuse me, the State of Illinois, and the Feds, Operation Head Start. So it's been a long time in coming, because there's a great study project to try and figure it out behaviorally. So that's the entrance and so forth, without going so much more into the detail. This from another view. Now we're doing another very important project, which again requires outdoor spaces, cortile. It's the first, I don't know, maybe Muncie has one, but Chicago doesn't have one yet. It's called the Children's Advocacy Center, and it's about case disposition of from 0 to puberty children who are sexually abused. And these different departments, the police department, state's attorneys, Department of Children and Family Services, and the CAC staff have never worked together. I mean, they work together, but they go to a police station, they go to a hospital. So this will be a first in Chicago, and it's a very, very important project. The idea is to deinstitutionalize. It's a big building, which at an earlier stage looked like this, is now entirely brick and broken down in scale, which still remains, and in profile, to deinstitutionalize, to try to pick up the lot divisions that were initially there, archaeologically speaking. So at an early study model, it was that. So the nature of our work continues to dwell on projects that have poignancy built into them. Then something happened. In the late 80s, the former director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, John Neff, was working with the then First National Bank in running its art program, and he asked a number of architects to, on the boardroom level on the 65th floor of the First National Bank, to design, evolve, conceive a conceptual piece, each of us. So people like Mario Gondelzonis, Helmut Jahn, whoever they were. And I was lucky enough to be one. And I did this piece, which is 5 by 10 feet, and is a map of Chicago in Formica, in gray, black, and white. And basically, it's interesting because something has just come up now, which I didn't think of till this very minute. Black, this is all, the colors are the racial locations in 89 of the predominant locations by race. So that whites were in certain locations, blacks in others. And what I did is to push them all together east of the Chicago River and the expressway to turn Chicago more into a linear city, and leave the subway lines out to what would then be deaccessioned as forest preserves and force people to live together. It was just an interesting project for me, but you can begin to sense some things that were on my mind. And then about that time, I think in 90, 91, 92, I forget, the AIA nationally had its convention in Chicago. And this guy, who was an old friend of mine, whose gallery I had designed, and which was then located on Michigan Boulevard, the building has since been torn down, gave me the 3 windows he had on the piano nobile of that building to use as I wished with respect to AIA was in town. So I did a kind of body, mind, and spirit thing where I showed, Mises' statement, architecture, and about the body, which is to say the able-bodied and the disabled. This was mind, the closed school. And this was spirit, the house, and the homeless condition. So at that point, I was already thinking about, at that time, I was the director of the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois Chicago, where I'd been for 8 years as director. And I kept thinking more and more about that. I'd brought Eva Maddox in, who's a colleague and an old friend of both my wife and mine I've known her longer than my wife, for 30 years. And she was doing interiors at the university, and we thought that maybe, just maybe, there was an alternative way to engage in some of these things, because she had done actually more socially conscious, in quotes, projects than I. And at that very moment, luck always plays into this. I was fired as director of the school, which was kind of the best thing that ever happened in my life, because if it hadn't happened, I'd still be at the school, still thinking it was the right thing, and never starting this thing called ArchiWorks, which then began. So I left the school, so I then resigned. I didn't keep my tenured position. And in let's see if I get this right, in the spring of 93, I left, and in the next year, we began planning ArchiWorks. This is Eva. And this is a symposium at Yale. I had one more, my last, visiting critic thing to do, which was at Yale that year. And that was the year that we were planning this. So I brought Eva and Bob Sommel and Doug Garofalo, two faculty that I brought to UIC, to Yale to work with the students from architecture, planning, the entire university, who were engaged separately in various aspects of social cause vis-a-vis the urban underclass in New Haven, which is serious, but not really doing it jointly, collectively. And so this became a dry run, in a way, at some level, for ArchiWorks. And then we began in the fall of '94, actively. And it's, you know, I have to tell you, it's that easy. You put out a poster, you put together a board of trustees of your friends, you call in all your markers, because we all do favors. If you live in one place your whole life, which is why you should live in one place your whole life, which is why I'm an admirer of Sonny Palmer. He's been here forever, which is terrific, which means, I mean, I'm less interested in San Francisco and Korea. I'm interested that he continues to be here so that he knows the territory. And so he's done favors for people, and people have done favors. There's been a quid pro quo, as there always is if you stay in one place. Eva, though she's from Tennessee, and of course I was born in Chicago, but she's been there since '64, something like that. And of course I've been there forever. So we were able to call in some markers so we could form a board of trustees. And we got a sugar, not daddy, mommy. And we applied for a 501c3, and we sent out these posters. I think Ball State got one in the beginning, and I still probably get stuff. I don't know. Michel says that they do. And we began, and lo and behold, and Pam was telling me that because she had as a student at Clemson, a guy named Pierre Georges, or Georges, because he's from Haiti or from the island somewhere in the Bahamas, and he was in our first class at ArchiWorks. So this is the end of our 5th year active, but there was an extra year of planning. Okay? So that's what ArchiWorks is. It provides an alternative curriculum which guides its participants in actual hands-on projects. It exposes its participants to problems that are not typically addressed in other established educational institutions. It seeks to break down conventional barriers, which is why I was glad to hear that language used by your chairman in architecture, between professional disciplines for the ultimate benefit of society. And so we began. We began in the basement of a building on 18th in Indiana across from the Glesner House, which was given to us, but then it was given by a developer, and then he wanted rent, of course. He was a developer. So we couldn't afford it. I mean, ArchiWorks is a very lean, tough machine. It is the lowest budget. The budget is $250,000 a year complete for faculty for this. I mean, at some point we have to stop that because you can only lean on people so much. But in any case, this piece of land was then given to us by Eva and my landlord. Our offices are adjacent, but the landlord is the same. And this piece of land was next to, partially under this dotted line, the expressway, the Ontario-Ohio connector to the Kennedy out of Chicago. This is east. And this is the parking lot that the guy had for all of his condos. But it, as you see, it became a trapezoid. It wasn't useful. And I suppose he wanted a tax write-off, but I really don't mean to give that any weight. The fact is, this was an incredible gesture. He gave us a very valuable piece of land. Judy Nizer, one of our trustees, then, lo and behold, underwrote the cost of the building. You can do this. So let me go back to the building. ArchiWorks has 3 teams. They're conferencing, they're workstations, and computer stuff, and these are breakout spaces for their projects. This is a little lecture hall, a little lounge, a bar, of course, have to have a bar, a shop for prototyping, men's and women's facilities, the administrators, full-time employees, trustees, and even and my office. It's a very simple building, very inexpensive. Well, he says inexpensive, but try and span a trapezoid and tell me how you do it inexpensively, because I still don't know. But this is a tech school in some measure. Surely you know how to do that. I didn't. So this is the building, which has a series of monitors in what would otherwise be a basilica-like form, but in order to make them parallel with the ground, of course, not only are the trusses getting smaller, but they're also getting deeper. So it was a nightmare. And the building, I thought, would be sort of like as a metaphor. I mean, architects' imaginations always run crazily wild, and I thought, well, it'll be a little bit like Magritte's locomotive coming out of the mantelpiece with a sort of a naval thing from underneath the expressway. And lo and behold, it does just that, because there it is, coming out from under the expressway in the context of the city. So on the one hand, I won't say it's exactly an accommodating, user-friendly look on the outside, but on the inside it surely is. This is the administrators thing, the trustees, the 3 workstations, and etc. This is the little lecture hall and lounge, the men's and women's symmetrically, of course, and the bar. So it's a school that has sized for 24, 1-year program, can be 1.5 if the young person wants to stay. Generally, the people are out of school. There have been a few in school. Pierre George had just graduated. The average age is about 29. There have been people as old as 55. It's about putting Humpty Dumpty, I was going to say Humpty Bumpty, but maybe it is Humpty Bumpty back together again. And is, for me, I mean, I can't, way, far and away, the most important thing I've ever done. They're real projects like developing and designing in what Eva calls, in a raw beta studies phase, stuff for the disabled formerly homeless people living in SRO. So this was, and they go, even though they're designed by one group, then a later group, this is mocked up at ArchiWorks in the new place, then comes up with furniture for a particular woman who lives in a particular SRO in Chicago. And here it is being installed. This is Doug Garofalo in her apartment at this particular SRO. That's a project. Excuse me. There's another project which was done on the subject of homelessness and developing a matrix and what could be done, which resulted in a thing that is even today being lobbied in the Chicago Building Department, an amendment to the building code to make the city user-friendly to the homeless. So these are not typical, what you might expect. These are very small projects that have big impacts. This is a marketing package, a part of a lot of work that's gone in a particular organization, West Humboldt Park, on the west side, in a very difficult place. This is a head pointer, here it is, designed for, actually, Carol Tiernan was telling me about her daughter, who was in anthropology at graduate school, I guess in the doctoral program at the USC, University of Chicago. Jenny Hahn, Sonny, you should make sure that your stepdaughter looks up, because Jenny's in the same program. She worked in my office, so here she's just modeling the thing. This is for cerebral palsy victims or patients, and it was picked up by Salmons Preston, which is the largest distributor and manufacturer and distributor of products for the disabled, and now they're working with us on other things, which I'll tell you about in a second. So this was done by a particular team. As an example of ArchiWorks, one was an industrial designer, one was a young architect, and one had been the head of pastoral studies at the Catholic Archdiocese in Chicago. And the fourth one had been a store planner for Crate and Barrel, whose life has now been changed after working on this team. She now works at the Rehab Institute at Northwestern Hospital in the engineering department developing products for the disabled, which is the purpose of ArchiWorks, is to skew the trajectory of these kids. This weighs 1/20th of what is done through triage at the Rehab Institute, is done with antifungal material, is easy to put on and take off by the cerebral palsy patient, and is used for working on a word processor and so forth. So we get a small royalty, which is set aside. ArchiWorks is a 501c3. There's no profit connected with it, as a scholarship through the Northwestern Hospital for those who can't afford it. This is a later project of a different team. This is the work of a young Belgian architect, a brilliant guy, for helping in the regimen for AIDS and HIV victims to develop a carrying case for their medication. And I'm not going to go to the detail of it, but it's a very important thing. This was another team person working on the same project, with another device, more esoteric. And then finally, so these are our beliefs. We believe in design responsibility and responsible design. We believe in breaking down barriers between theory and practice. We believe in cross-disciplinary design collaboration. We believe in alternative forms of design education and practice. We believe in non-discriminatory universal design. We believe in environmental justice. We believe that delivery systems are every bit as important as design. We believe in design ethics. In a town, Chicago, whose motto is make no little plans, Dan Burnham, we believe in making every little plan the best it can be. We believe in the value of design, the poetics of design, and their meaning to society. Thank you very much.